Have you ever made the mistake of making New Year's resolutions and making far too many of them? You wanted to change your life and you came up with a list of 20 things that you are going to change when this new year hit. And because you tried to do way too many, you ended up doing none at all. Well, the same thing happens anytime you're trying to modify behavior. If you try to modify too many behaviors at once, it's going to lead to failure. So a question in behavior modification becomes, if you identify a lot of target behaviors that need to be changed, how can you decide which ones you should change first? How can you prioritize your behavior modification plan? And that's what we're going to be taking a look at in this video, because I'm Dr. Igor Yurichevich, and this is behavior modification. Let's go. All right, so today we're going to talk about prioritizing target behaviors. So Cooper, Heron, and Heward, they mentioned that when more than one eligible target behavior remains after careful evaluation, the question becomes which behavior should be changed first. So if you have gone through a behavior assessment and you now have more than one target behavior that you have identified is important in this client's life, or maybe in your own life if you're trying to self-manage, how do you decide which of these behaviors you need to change first? And if you need an overview of behavior assessment and how to decide if a behavior needs to be changed, that is, if a behavior should become a target behavior, something that we're going to try to modify, take a look at my previous video, link in the description. But today we're going to focus on, once you have that list, how do you order the list? How do you know which behavior you need to attack first and which behaviors you can save for later? Because there is a limit on how much behavior change you can impose or successfully do on a single individual. There is a limit to how much behavioral modification, how many consequences, how much learning, how much training, how much of a session you can do. So oftentimes, just because of those limits, we can't change all the behaviors successfully at once. We have to decide these behaviors we're going to attack first, and these other behaviors we're going to wait until later. Now, all of them are important. So the question is how do you make that prioritizing list? How do you put them in order of importance? Which ones do you choose first? So let's go through an example, and we'll use this to illustrate how to prioritize target behaviors. So let's say that you have a client and they are a child and they have problem behaviors in school. So they have been identified as needing some behavior modification. They have been brought to a therapist because they are just having difficulties in school and they're not attaining their goals, and that behavior needs to be improved. So let's say that you go through a behavior assessment and you identify a number of different target behaviors. So let's say that you identify behaviors in this child. So one behavior in the top left there, they don't pay attention in class and they distract other children. So they're distracted in class. Is behavior number one. Let's say that behavior number two is that they actually fall asleep in class. So this is a behavior that we would want to decrease. Falling asleep in class, not conducive to being successful at school. Let's say that behavior number three is that they are very argumentative and they have poor social skills. So they yell a lot. They get very angry as well. And let's say that behavior number four is that they actually have a tendency for violence as well. So they have been involved in physical altercations, in fights, they throw hands. All of these things we identify as target behaviors that need to be changed. However, we need to then put them in some sort of list of importance. We need to prioritize which behavior do we need to change first, and which behaviors can wait until those first behaviors are dealt with. Because again, we might only have, a 1 hour session with this individual, maybe twice a week. And in those 2 hours, we cannot modify all four of these behaviors. So we might have to choose which one do we go with first and deal with that. And then once that behavior has been dealt with, move on to the next. So how do we make that decision? How do we prioritize those behaviors? Well, the way that we're going to do it, and the way that it's suggested, is to judge each of these potential target behaviors, judge them using 9 questions that will help you determine whether the behavior needs attention first, and it will also help you determine the relative order in which the remaining behaviors will be addressed. So these 9 questions, we'll apply them to all of these behaviors, and they will help us put them in an order of which behavior needs to be addressed first, needs to be behavior modified first, and which ones can wait until later. All right, so let's start off with that list of 9 questions. So the first question is, does this behavior, and again, you apply this to every single behavior. So for each of those 4 behaviors, for being distracted in class, for falling asleep, for yelling and fighting, for each of those 4 behaviors, we would ask, does this behavior pose any danger to the client or to others? And behaviors that cause harm or pose a serious threat, pose a threat to either the client's personal safety or to other people's personal safety or health, they have to receive first priority. So those are the ones that go to the top of the list. That is the first question that we ask. So in this case here, in this example with this individual, basically being distracted in class, that doesn't pose any sort of a threat to anybody. Falling asleep in class, they're safe. They're asleep in class, that's fine. Getting into an argument, that doesn't pose very much of a threat. It poses a slightly larger threat because we're getting into things that can violate the personal safety now of others, but definitely fighting. Definitely the physical assault part of this, that poses a threat to the safety of others. So, and it would pose a threat to their own safety. If they get involved in a fight, they can easily get harmed themselves. So after question number 1, the fighting would go to the top of the list for the moment as the first behavior that we would need to address. All right, question number 2. We would then ask ourselves, well, for these 4 behaviors, how many opportunities will the person have to use this new behavior? Or, so that's for positive behavior, or for negative behavior, for our example here, how often does this problem behavior occur? So how frequent does this behavior occur? How many opportunities will they have to put this behavior into practice? Again, for positive behavior, and how often does the problem behavior occur? So let's say in this case, we take a look at their behaviors again, and we have, their 4 behavior, and let's say that they fall asleep in class once a month, right? So it's a problem behavior, but they're only falling asleep in class once a month, but they argue every single day, and they get into a fight at least once a week. In that case, falling asleep in class would move down the list, and then arguing and fighting would again move up the list. And again, this helps us to form our priority list of our target behaviors. Next question. How long-standing is the problem or skill deficit? This is one of the ones where we are going to take a look at things that need to be addressed basically from a historical point of how long has it been going on. So how long-standing is this problem? So problems that have been going on for a long time, problems that are been going on for a long time have been very well reinforced. They've come under environmental variable control extremely well. They've been maintained for a long period of time. They need to be addressed first, rather than behaviors that have just popped up, that have just appeared recently. They are the ones that can be pushed off until later. So if the getting distracted in class, if that has been going on for years, like this child has been distracted in class ever since kindergarten, but the yelling and the fighting has only popped up in the last month, let's say, in that case, the getting distracted in class would now move up a little bit on that priority list, and the fighting and the arguing would move down on that priority list. So again, these questions, as we see, they give you this ability to kind of relatively rank, and you need to consider all 9 questions as we go through this in order to come up with your final ranking. So some questions will move certain behaviors up and other behaviors down, and vice versa with following questions. So again, we're going to prioritize those behaviors that have been going on for a long time, and deprioritize, I guess if that's the word, the behaviors that have been only recently occurring. All right, number 4. Will changing this behavior produce higher rates of reinforcement for the person? So what this means is, or what this is asking is, if you change the behavior, will that allow this individual to achieve higher rates of reinforcement? Will that allow this individual to basically be reinforced when that behavior is made? So let's take a look at, again, these examples for what we mean by this. So being distracted in class. Being distracted in class takes away reinforcers from the teacher. It takes away reinforcers from doing successfully at school. So if you were to change that behavior, that could produce high rates of reinforcement for this individual. They could basically get reinforced by that teacher multiple times during the day for paying attention in school. However, for staying awake in school, typically you don't get reinforced for staying awake in school, right? You get punished for falling asleep in school. So that's not going to allow them to achieve that high rate of reinforcement, other than the fact that they will be, woken up, and then they'll be able to achieve more reinforcement from the teacher. But basically, we're looking for situations where changing that behavior is going to allow that individual to earn more reinforcement in their interactions with other people. And things like paying attention would then move up the priority list. Falling asleep would probably move down the priority list. And then arguing and fighting would also move up the priority list, because if you can decrease those target behaviors, the opportunities for reinforcement for this individual will also increase. So if they're not yelling and arguing at people, they can engage in positive social interactions. Same thing with, if they're not fighting, they're not going to be suspended, they're not going to be in detention. Allows them to get higher rates of reinforcement. Those would move up the priority list. All right, number 5. What will be the relative importance of this target behavior to future skill development and independent functioning? So each of these target behaviors should be judged in terms of their relation to other critical behaviors. Are these behaviors prerequisites or supportive to other very important behaviors that might come later on, that are either important for optimal learning, optimal development, or independent functioning in the future? So let's take a look at these for examples here. So let's say that let's take a look at the one where you're falling asleep in class. So falling asleep in class, if that is a prerequisite or supportive of other critical behaviors needed for independent functioning in the future. So let's take a look at what this is going to be like in the future. If somebody falls asleep, for example, at work, they'll get reprimanded, they'll get written up, and eventually they'll get let go, right? Eventually they'll get fired. You're not allowed to fall asleep at work. However, if this individual is actually fighting, that has a lot more of an impact on their functioning in the future, right? So if you're fighting, you could get sent to jail, you could be incarcerated. Those are very, very large impacts on your development and your functioning and your independence in the future. So again, we would take a look at these examples here. Being distracted in class, that is a prerequisite or supportive of being able to learn academically and learn those important skills. Being argumentative might not be as important if it doesn't take away from their ability to learn future skills. So again, we would take a look at these 4 behaviors and how impactful will they be for future behaviors that are important for independent functioning. And the more important they are, the higher up the list they go. All right, number 6, will changing this behavior reduce negative or unwanted attention from others? So this is an important one because of the world that we live in. So we never want to call attention to an individual because of certain target behaviors. And whereas it would be optimal, or it would be a sort of utopia situation if certain negative behaviors did not draw unwanted attention from our social circles, that's just not the case. So the prime example of this would be something like table manners, right? Table manners are important social functions, and if somebody cannot eat with a knife and fork, if somebody has trouble getting food into their mouth, that's going to get a lot of unwanted attention for that person. And we would move that up the priority list because of this idea of reducing that unwanted attention from others. So in our example here, the unwanted attention from others, in this case, sleep does not get a lot of unwanted attention from others. Getting distracted in class might get a little bit of unwanted attention from others, but things like arguing and fighting, that can get a lot of unwanted attention from others, especially if you run across the wrong individual. So in that case, the arguing and fighting would again move up the priority list. The other two behaviors would move down the priority list. All right, number 7. Will this new behavior produce reinforcement for significant others? So not from significant others. We already took a look at that. This one is for significant others. So this one's a little counterintuitive because we're trying to change a client's behavior. And now we're wondering, well, will that change in the client's behavior produce reinforcement for significant others? But this is something that should not be overlooked, because the significant others have such a huge impact on this individual's life and are also oftentimes very important for the implementation of a behavior modification strategy. So, for example, in this situation here, think about the parents of this child. The distraction, right? If this child gets distracted when they're talking to their parents, and now all of a sudden they pay attention, how reinforcing will that be for their parents? It will be reinforcing, right? When they're talking to their child and their child's paying attention, those parents will think to themselves, oh my gosh, this is really, I feel like I want to talk to my child in the future, right? It will be reinforcing for the parents. Falling asleep doesn't really impact the parents. I don't remember the last time a parent has complained that their child slept too much. But take a look at those last two behaviors, argumentative and fighting. If they are being argumentative with their parents, if they are being physically abusive and attacking their parents, and you can get those to decrease, that will reinforce their significant others, those parents, so greatly. So those behaviors, again, would move up on our priority list, and the other two behaviors would move down, not because of the importance to the client, but because of the importance of their significant others. And when those reinforcements occur to the significant others, they will then be more motivated and more likely to implement the behavioral change strategy because of that reinforcement, which cannot be overlooked with its importance. All right, 2 more to go. Number 8, how likely is the success in changing this target behavior? So some behaviors, they're more difficult to change than others. So we want to take a look and prioritize high success behaviors, behaviors that are more likely to be successfully changed than behaviors just because of their nature that are least likely to be successfully changed. So things that we got to consider are things like, what does the literature say about changing this behavior? Does the literature say, does the research say that this behavior is easily changed, or does it say that it's not easily changed? Second, how experienced is the practitioner, right? How much experience does the practitioner have in doing this particular or changing this particular behavior? Third, what is the extent, or sorry, to what extent can the variables in the client's environment be controlled effectively? And then finally, are the resources available to implement and maintain that intervention long enough for the desired outcomes? So if we're looking at these 4 behaviors again, what does the literature say about the ease of changing distraction versus the ease of changing sleeping versus the ease of changing arguing versus the ease of changing fighting? Secondly, how experienced is your practitioner? Do you have a practitioner that is experienced in dealing with physically aggressive clients? Or do they lack that experience, in which case you would not want to start maybe with that physically aggressive behavior? To what extent can you control the variables in the child's environment? So for example, the parents that are giving attention, how likely are they to, to follow up on the implementation strategy? How likely are they to be a part of that behavior strategy change? If there are environmental variables in the school situation that need to be changed to modify these behaviors, how well able are you to change those behaviors? Some things you just can't change. It's not within your power. They need to be changed, right? They're antecedent variables that are, or they're reinforcing this behavior. They need to be changed, but maybe they're just not under your power. And then lastly, do you have the resources to implement and maintain the intervention long enough to achieve the desired outcomes? So you might need 6, 7, 8 months, to change this behavior where it reaches its target level, and you might not have the ability to do that. You just might not have the time. Maybe this individual just cannot make that kind of time commitment for whatever reason. Maybe they're falling out of the system within, a certain amount of time. So those things all need to be considered to identify which one of these variables, which one of these behaviors you're going to try to change. You're going to go for the high target. You're going to prioritize the highly successful behaviors, the ones that are most likely to be able to change, over the ones that are less likely to be able to change. All right, and we got number 9 here. How much will it cost? And you might notice that we are out of little sticky Post-it notes, or are we? Oh, there we go. All right, so number 9, how much will it cost to change this behavior? And this one needs to be nuanced, because it's not just financial cost. It's not just adding up your expenditures for equipment, materials, transportation, salaries, and all those, the staff that you need. That's not just the only cost that should be considered. You also have to consider the cost in resources that, for example, the client brings to the situation. So time, right? These interventions, they cost time. So you need to ask yourself, how much of the client's time will the behavior change demand? What other behaviors will not be changed because of this time cost? So maybe one of these behaviors, in order to successfully change them, take twice as long or twice as much intervention, twice the duration of intervention and the sleeping, with the same amount of cost that you would take care of the fighting. In that case, arguing and sleeping would move up, fighting would move down. You have to consider, how much is this actually going to cost, both in terms of economic and in terms of other factors like client's time, in order to determine which behavior is at the top of your list. All right, so those are the 9 questions that we look at when prioritizing behavior. So you have those multiple target behaviors. You got to rank them. You basically assess all of them on those 9 questions. So does this behavior pose any danger to the client or others? How many opportunities will the person have to use the new behavior, or how often does this problem behavior occur? How long-standing is the problem or skill deficit? Will changing this behavior produce higher rates of reinforcement for the person? What will be the relative importance of this target behavior for the person's future and independent functioning? Will changing this behavior reduce negative unwanted attention from others? Will this new behavior produce reinforcement from those significant others, especially the parents and other caregivers? How likely are you to succeed? And then finally, how much will it cost? And that includes monetary expenditures, as well as things like the client's own time and the cost of not changing other behaviors. So that was a lot. So we're going to wrap it up at this point. Next time, we're going to take a look at measuring behavior. So you can't assess a behavior unless you can measure it. So next time, we're going to take a look at how to measure behavior, some of the tactics for that. But until then, I'm Dr. Igor Yurichevich. Till I see you next time, stay frosty, stay functional, and go modify some behavior. Anybody that's ever made 10 New Year's resolutions knows that if you make 10, you're going to get 0. So I'm going to start that all over again. So if you need an overview of how to assess a behavior and whether or not a behavior should be, oh my gosh, well, I'm going to start that whole thing over again.